that ass back like a boom, 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 boom.
Good evening, folks, and you're very welcome to the 6th edition of DriveThru Sports Weekly on Tuesday, the 2nd of November. Yes, indeed, Monday, the 2nd of November, even. We're starting anyway. It could take me a few days to before I have it all completed, but we have a start. We're going to start this evening anyway and see where we end up. I suppose you could say I'm going to start with Gaelic games, although it will be from a different sort of angle, very personal angle, and I'll be honest with you all, a very emotionally stirring one, I suppose. You would say by now, I'm sure, whether through the auspices of our own site or through the national media, I'm sure you will have heard by now that whether through my own site or on via the national media airwaves and channels, I'm sure most of you, or certainly anyone with an interest in this, in Gaelic games, or indeed any sporting activity within Ireland, nearly will have heard at this stage about the serious illness which befell Meath All-Ireland winning captain from 1999, Graham Geraghty, in the middle of last week. And now I'm sure there will be plenty of people know this anyway, but there will be people that won't. So if you would please indulge me for a couple of minutes, I would hope that I will be able to keep my emotions in check and keep things together, because from a bare football and entertainment point of view, it would be impossible to properly quantify the impact which Graham Geraghty and the great Meath teams, of which he was a central part, have had on my life. Now, I have never made any secret of the fact that what goes on the football field, or hurling, or rugby, or soccer, or horse racing, or whatever it may be, sporting activity, and being in around it, and if possible involved in it back in the day, or even just writing on it or commenting on it, which sadly is what it tends to be more so nowadays, whether having been in situ or just commenting from watching on television, online, or that. But all of the above means so much more to me than just the bare results of what goes on between the white lines of the pitch, so to speak, or whatever sporting arena happens to be involved in the relevant situation at a given time. But there is no doubt that initially, at least, and certainly from an emotional or sentimental perspective, this would probably always be the case. I would hope that Gaelic football and hurling, and particularly success garnered therein by Dunboyne and of course Meath teams mean so much more to me than the bare results of what goes on between the lines, as they say, because as I wrote during last week when news of Graham's illness broke, it's only when you look back and you think of the joy and entertainment and the lift, the emotional lift that his deeds and the deeds of the other lads that were on them great teams with him, and indeed going back even before that to the teams of the late 80s and early 90s, which are Robbie O'Malley's, Mick Lyons, Martin O'Connell's, Liam Harnan, Liam Hayes, Jerry Mack, Dave Beggy, Colin O'Rourke, Bernie Flynn. I mean, you could go on and on and on and on. What those men, and of course Sean, who was the conductor of the orchestra more or less, what those men did, what their sporting deeds did for me at least, and I'm sure I'm certainly not alone in this, but certainly from my own perspective, I would put it as plainly and as simply as saying that the enjoyment and form of therapy that I derived from seeing them do what they did best was actually a major part of what made life worth living. Now, look, we all know that in the last decade or so, things have been leaner and meaner from a Meath perspective as regards success, but that is no one individual's fault, and that's a topic for a different day completely. Now is neither the time nor place to be going into that, but it's only when you think of where we are now that you look back and you realise just how blessed we were as supporters, first of all, to be able to enjoy what what those marvellous footballers under the directorship of my magnificent neighbour were able to produce, that entertained us and lifted our spirits for a decade and a half nearly, was absolutely utterly unbelievable, and it reminds me, I suppose, of the Joni Mitchell song Big Yellow Taxi. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? But you know, whether by accident or design, from very early on, once I started following GAA, as in actually going to games, the first of which in my case was league semi-final between Meath and Cork in Croke Park on the 14th of April 1990, which Meath won by 14 points to 10. Now, there are other particular facets of that game I remember, which I am not going to harrow up here now because it is not the time to do so, but the point is that very soon after I got into the habit, I suppose you would say, which very quickly went from habit to absolute way of life, and further on then to actual reason for living, of going to matches, courtesy of my dad, God bless him, of course, who made it all possible in so many ways. But from very early on, after I started going to games, you know, the only way to describe it is that very quickly GAA became a drug and an addiction to me, in the sense of being a very needed and very cherished form of therapy by way of dealing with what life's package deal had thrown in this direction. And to be honest, back then I don't know did I ever envisage a situation where I would actually be getting actively involved with the GAA from the perspective of, say, getting involved with the club here in Dunboyne, or you know, what would you say, in around teams, or being in a position to make a living out of being in around GAA. But I suppose it was after that was certainly after that Meath Cork game in Croke Park. I remember, I'm not even sure off the top of my head, because I'll be honest, with all that's gone on in the last week or so, I haven't been in a great position as regards researching this evening's show, but well, I can't remember what class I was in school at the time. I do know that it was the done thing in school at the time that every Friday was writing an essay, sort of day, let it be in English or Irish, or sometimes both, depending on who the teacher happened to be. But I always remember the Friday after being in Croke Park for that league semi-final, I basically did what was a match report on the game now. When I actually dug it out last night, thinking there was a date on it, but unfortunately there wasn't. And it's only when one looks back and sees where I am now as regards writing in a lot of ways compared to back then. But look, back then I was only 9 years of age, and every journey has to start somewhere. But the point is, I do believe that was the first occasion on which I did actually do a match report. I think what the teacher at the time was under the impression was that I was going to do just an essay about the whole experience from the point of view of the day out, the trip into Croker, all the trappings that went along with it, and not so much about the game itself. But there was only one way I wanted to do it, and that was the way it ended up being done. But what that also did, I think, was open the door and shine a light for myself on a way as to how I could actively become involved in the GAA to some extent, with the long-term possibility or hope or dream or whatever you want to call it of possibly making a career out of writing about, well, it would have been principally GAA at that time, but there's no doubt that sports journalism definitely flashed itself onto the radar at that stage. But I then, as regards where things went after that, the next sort of big, I suppose you'd call it, I don't know what you call it, a turning point, I'd say milestone would be a better way of putting it. Meath, of course, went on in 1990, having beaten Cork in that league semi-final. They went on, beat Down in the final, beat Dublin in the Leinster final, thanks to a Colin O'Rourke goal, which, in all honesty, probably never should have stood, but it did, and let's not complain about it, because it actually happened out that Colin was the captain that day. So that was the Leinster title in the bag. Then they came through a bruising encounter against Donegal in the All-Ireland semi-final, on a day when Bernard Flynn in particular had a wonderful game. If memory served me correctly, I think he scored at least 2-2, if not more, before they were unfortunately beaten by Cork in the final, which of course back in 1990 guaranteed Cork the double, because they had already beaten Galway in the hurling final a fortnight beforehand. And of course Teddy McCarthy, who was probably the poster boy dual player of his era, would have picked up medals for both the hurling and the football that year. And I think Dennis Walsh may have been involved as well. I can't swear to it, but I think Dennis Walsh may have been involved in both too, but I suppose from my own personal point of view, that 1990 All-Ireland final, even though Meath were beaten and it was my first experience of being around when Meath lost an All-Ireland final, because even though I wouldn't have been in Croke Park for 87 and 88, and indeed I wasn't there in 1990 for the final either, because for reasons I will go into some other day, but that 1990 All-Ireland final in its own way has turned out to be one of the most significant occurrences in my life, because on the night after the final, as the as is the tradition, the teams had their slow pilgrimage homecoming, if you want to call it that, and I remember being on the shoulders of the late John McCrory in the middle of Dunboyne village when the team was being introduced, but of even greater significance that night, by hook or by crook, because I honestly don't remember how it ended up happening, but I ended up shall we say parked in the wheelchair right beside the team bus at the Big Tree in Dunboyne, which of course very sadly is no longer with us, although I think half the population of the parish, both past and present, any of them that are overseas or local, will have got their piece of the Big Tree after it was recently taken down on safety grounds by local firm Helian Tree Care, who did, it has to be said, an exceptional job in taking it down and tidying the place up after the tree was removed. But back on that September night in 1990, it was still very much the focal point in the village. If you wanted to meet someone in Dunboyne who wasn't used to the place or hadn't been around the place before or whatever it was, you always told them, I'd meet you at the Big Tree in the village, and that was how it was. Now, on the night after the 1990 All-Ireland final, the stage, which was basically a local businessman's lorry, was parked adjacent to the Big Tree, and which of course meant that the team, when they were being introduced to the crowd, they would have been all up on the stage. But what also happened was that the bus was parked right beside the stage, so through the very kind auspices of the late Frank O'Connor, God be good to him, Frank took my manual wheelchair, with me in it obviously, off I think it was my two sisters that was with me, and proceeded to plant the manual wheelchair right beside the door of the bus, and his daughter Margaret, in a move which I will forever be grateful for it. And this little keepsake is still in the vaults here at Boylan Talk Sport headquarters. Margaret went off and got the programme signed for me by all the players, but Frank went one better and left me beside the door of the bus, so I got to shake hands with each and every one of the panel before they got back on the bus and headed for the county club, including, it has to be said, and maybe everything in life happens for a reason, but even then I think I had identified that Colin O'Rourke was my absolute hero, and for some reason he managed to get up onto the bus without me copying him. I was obviously talking to one of the other lads or whatever the case was, but none other than Shawnee B himself, my namesake, neighbour, minder, healer and everything else in between, noticed that I hadn't met Colin and knew how much meeting the most famous left boot in Meath with the blue bandage would mean to me, so he proceeded to run down the bus and get the great man to come out and get off the bus, and he spent a few minutes with me, and that planted a seed which has gone over the years, and it's hard to believe it's gone 30 years ago now, to a point where not only are Colin and I great friends, his son Shane and I are equally as close, if not even closer than I was with his dad, and or am with his dad rather. But my reason for mentioning all of the above is this. Well, it's two-pronged actually. Firstly, because that was the first night that I would have met most, if not all, the Meath players of the day in person, and as I say, in the case of Colin, actually it was the beginning of a friendship that has, and please God will, forever endure, and indeed spawned, as I say, to include Shane as well. But following on from that, I suppose I would have got to know a lot of the players of the old Meath team, if you want to call them that, over the years. Like, I'm not going to name names because I'd surely leave someone out rather than include somebody that shouldn't be there. But the other significant occurrence that night, I suppose you would say, was that as Sean Boylan described it himself, after Meath had won the All-Ireland in 1999, he said, and I quote, 9 years ago tonight, two young men carried a cup down to the streets of Dunboyne, who were central figures to lighting the torch for the next generation of Meath stars to come. The two men he referred to were none other than our own Enda McManus from Dunboyne, who was the captain, and one Graham Geraghty, who was the centre half back and standout player on the Meath team that had beaten Kerry in the All-Ireland minor final before the seniors lost to Cork, giving the county our first All-Ireland minor title since 1957 at that stage. And of course, if one was to delve a little bit more into the significance of that team, you would just look at the lads off who went on to play senior and indeed represent Meath and succeed with Meath at the very highest level. People like Conor Martin and Vincent Ryan from Ballinlough, who would have won National League medals, Tommy Hanley, Graham Garrity, Ronan McGrath, Tony Byrne, John McCarthy, who is currently the manager of the Meath Miners, Hugh Carlin from Gael Columkill, who was actually on the Meath senior panel the following year, but was then unfortunately lost to the county because he went off playing rugby. But of course, again, reason for mentioning same was that many members of that team were pivotal to the excuse me, to the All-Ireland successes of 1996 and 1999, none more so than Graham Garrity himself, but of course, in between being one of the standout stars on that minor team in 1990 and going on to complete the set of All-Ireland medals as it was in 1996 and 1999, you will notice I mentioned completing the set there for the simple reason that Graham Garrity was also pivoted to the county's first and perhaps a little bit shamefully only All-Ireland under-21 success to date, when they again defeated Kerry in the final, this time in O'Muir Park in Portlaoise. Now, as far as I can recall, Graham had already made his senior debut by that stage, but perhaps once in a generation a player comes along in whatever sport it may be that immediately an observer can notice that they're going to stand out from the crowd, and that was certainly the case with Graham from a very early age. Indeed, going back as far as the age of 8, I believe, because my father has crystal clear memories of him competing in the athletics in the Mardyke in Cork in what must have been about the late 1970s or early 1980s, and he basically swept the boards all around him that day in the Mardyke. And looking at how things have or how things did proceed in the intervening years, that would have been absolutely very easy to understand, because whatever about his ability as a footballer, let it be as a Gaelic footballer or a rugby player or a soccer player, all of which, well, naturally he did ascend to the very top of where a player can go in Gaelic football, and by extension the international rules. But having observed enough of the great man in a few different sporting codes, I would have absolutely no doubt that he could have gone on to being equally as efficient with either with the oval ball in his hand or with the ball confined to the ground, as it were, with no use of the hands, because it was obvious that if one thinks back to the late summer, early autumn of 1994, I think it was, George Graham, who was then the Arsenal manager, sort of, how shall we say, scouted out Graham and brought him over and gave him a series of trials. I think there was definitely one anyway, because I know Paul Merson famously said he was the fittest looking athlete he'd ever come across, and couldn't get over that Graham was playing Gaelic football, which basically the English guys couldn't get over the fact that this was amateur sport, and that even after looking like a superstar on a Saturday or Sunday, that Graham, and not only Graham but of course all the lads, would have had to get up and go to work on the Monday morning after games. Now, mercifully, as we now know, Arsenal's loss was very much Meath's gain, because I can only suspect, and I hope I'm right in saying this, that it was the influence of none other than Sean Boylan that eventually persuaded Mr. Garrity to forgo Highbury in the bright lights of London and stay around and, as it transpired, be the iconic inspirational figure of his generation. Now, I will admit that even after Meath had won the All-Ireland in 1996, which was basically the first All-Ireland of which yours truly had proper comprehension. Graham was one of the few lads off the Meath team at that stage that I would not have known all that well at all, and absolutely, totally, and utterly was besotted by him as regards a footballer from the time of that All-Ireland minor final in 1990. I know for many, well, for the 5 and a bit years before the move was eventually made, I was at pains to see him given a chance in the forward line, because between a combination of seeing him playing at either midfield or in the forwards with Anglestown, and seeing what he was capable of doing in an attacking role from half back of the county, switching him up to somewhere in the front six seemed to be an absolute no-brainer, and thankfully after he scored 1-2 from half back in the 1994 Leinster final, and put on a sparkling display from half back in the 95 final, even though Meath were absolutely thrashed by Dublin by 10 points. Eventually, towards the end of the 1995-96 National League campaign, in fact, in the quarter-final thereof against Mayo in Hyde Park, Sean took the plunge and put him up in the forwards on a day when he also moved a certain man called Brendan Riley up to the forwards that day, in a move which would prove to have extremely telling consequences before the year was out. But that day in Hyde Park, even though Mayo actually won the game, and deservedly so, there's no doubt that the thing that will stick in my mind from the day in question, apart from Tommy Dowd being sent off for what I think was the first and only time in his inter-county career, along with former Mayo fullback Kevin Cahill. Apart from that, the other big standout, even though Mayo did win by a goal, deservedly so as I said, was the absolute explosion onto the scene, if one wanted to call it that, even though he'd been knocking around for a few years, of the newly appointed Meath number 12. And of course, as we now know, he were done in the All-Ireland semi-final of that year against Tyrone to give as good a display of football as anyone in the Meath jersey has ever given in Croke Park. And of course, by the time the 99 All-Ireland came about, Sean had gone even further. Number one, by placing him at full forward, and number two, by making him captain. The latter move being one which Sean was lacerated for in some quarters, because they all said he was mad because Graham was a loose cannon, and Graham was this, and Graham's discipline was bad, and a load of other bovine excrement like that. But the bottom line was that, as per usual, the herbalist had the right remedy, and his transformation of Graham into a full forward and the captain was the most impactful thing that happened to a football team in a long, long time, because his football that year in particular was out of this world. the so-called disciplinary time bomb that everyone was expecting to blow up in Sean's face was no more than a damn squib, and the move to full forward essentially were what enabled Graham to continue to go on and play for the county right up until 2011, when Seamus Banty McEnany was in charge. And perhaps, now, I've always felt that McEnany got a raw deal from the Meath County Board, and indeed could have been left there for another season, but from a personal point of view, I always think the biggest miss out of it all was that even though Graham was 38 years of age at the time, there's absolutely no doubt that he could have at least given one more year to the county setup, and it would make a body sick when one thinks that in 2009 and 2010, and indeed after 11, that those in charge deemed him no longer required. Now, mind you, in one case there were a plethora of players who were offloaded who never should have been at the time, some of which were eventually resurrected, more of which weren't, but right up to that very last year when Graham did play with Meath, of course, he scored an absolutely marvellous goal against Dublin, which there was absolutely nothing wrong with, but in one of the most disgraceful refereeing decisions that was ever seen in Croke Park, and Lord knows Meath were unfortunately at the butt end of a lot of them, but that particular day against Dublin, when Jimmy McKee of Armagh ridiculously ruled out his goal, was absolutely the worst bit of adjudicating I have seen from an official in Croke Park in a long, long time. And I mean, I'm sure most of you will remember the clip of Graham pointing up to the big screen at the back of the Hill 16, where it was clearly shown that there was absolutely nothing wrong with his levering himself up for the goal, and that the finish itself was as good a blast of a shot as one would be liable to see anywhere. But what that they sort of there's two things always come back to my mind about it. If Hawkeye or a television match official, or whatever you want to call it, had been in existence that day, there's absolutely no doubt that goal would have stood, because its overruling was an absolute disgrace. But having been in deep thought and very emotionally affected by news of Graham's illness in the last week, You know, that particular day came back to mind because I think I would be fairly safe in saying that if it was any other Meath player or any other player in Ireland on a pitch that took that shot and buried it the way Graham did, that score would have been allowed to stand, and you know that it didn't was just down to this I don't know, bad boy reputation or whatever you want to call it, that Graham was saddled with for as long as he played football, certainly with me, and even in some cases when it came to action in other places as well. But you know, you should never, if time has taught me anything, and this wasn't time, I copped this on from a very young age, that you should never ever number one, judge a book by its cover, or number two, take somebody else's summation of a person and what they're like based on somebody else's judgment. It would have always been my philosophy, and will always be my philosophy, to take people as I find them and form my own judgments on and relations with them thereafter. But you know, I mean, it's no secret at this stage that Graham would have had his scrapes with the rule book and whatnot over the years. All the best players do. You think Roy Keane, Trevor Brennan, you know, there's probably others that I just can't think. Well, the obvious one, and he's another man I'm very, very fond of, I have to say, even though I haven't met him yet, but I will someday, hopefully, and that is, of course, Paul Galvin of Kerry, now the Wexford manager, Davy Fitz. You could go on and on and on, because these are all great people that every team needs, or every setup needs, no matter whether it's sporting or not. Everything needs a bit of an X factor to you know, to make it successful, or whatever way one wants to put it. But anyway, my point for going off on that little tangent was that after one particular occasion on which Graham found himself in a particularly hot bath of water with the officialdom of the GAA, I not so gently persuaded someone that knew him quite well. I'd never even met the man or spoke to him, apart from maybe bidding him the time of day after the 1996 All-Ireland final at that stage. But I not so gently persuaded somebody who knew him far better than I at that stage to give me his phone number after he had became entangled in this particular sparky tub of hot water, and completely unsolicited I gave him a ring just to offer my support to him in relation to the ongoing travails he was going through at the time. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure what sort of reception I was going to get, for the simple reason that, as I say, I'd never really spoke to the man, but had heard a lot of what I will only call over the airways bulldog as to what he was like in this and that and the other, and all I can tell you is that immediately I spoke to the man, it became very, very obvious that summary of the man's character and everything about him was as far out as the lighthouse, because on that first occasion I did ring him and we spoke about what he had gone on at the time, and I told him that I would quietly and discreetly do what I could at the time to try and help his way out of the particular situation. But on that particular morning stroke lunchtime, when the phone call did eventually wrap up after what I think was about 45 minutes, it concluded with arrangements having been made for Graham and his wife Amanda to come up to the mine the following weekend for a rendezvous with yours truly, which happened to be actually the weekend Dunboyne had won the county championship that particular weekend, and I don't know how many Dunboyne people and people from other clubs indeed who happened to be around Dunboyne after we had won the championship came to me after and said that they could not believe how wrong the public perception of Graham Geraghty that was out there. I would hope it has been fairly well quashed by now, but how wrong the public perception of Graham Geraghty that is out and in circulation at the time was, and what a nice fella he was, and what nice people himself and Amanda were, and what not. And this was only, it's terrible when you have to think of it this way, but of course there was this, from a personal point of view, for me there was a sense of vindication to it, in that it was only people telling me what I knew already, but it also stuffed a lot of begrudgers and gossips and people who were just quite happy to jump on whatever bandwagon was populist at the time, and have a crack off the man's character without even maybe having been within 40 yards of him before, never mind spending time in his company. But from that time there was a bond that developed between Graham and I, which has endured and strengthened, and please God will always be there, whereby if one or other of us were playing into the wind, there'll be phone calls, there'll be texts, there could be emails, whatever it may be. We're never too far away from being in contact with each other. So, it brings me, I suppose, to last Wednesday morning, I think it was. Wednesday morning or Thursday morning. Thursday, actually. Where I always have a saying that phone calls either last thing at night or first thing in the morning rarely involve good news, and when the phone call in this instance came from where it did, I absolutely knew it wasn't going to be good news, but nothing or nobody could have prepared me for what was relayed in the phone call. But it really, hearing of Graham's serious illness, and indeed the gravity of it was underlined very bloody quickly when mention of transfer from Navan to Beaumont Hospital was mentioned, because I'm sure most of you will know at this stage, or anyone that doesn't, Beaumont Hospital in Dublin, it is the recognised hospital for dealing with a certain type of ailment or problem in particular. So when it became apparent that that's where we were at, it became a very serious, very worrying, very distressing situation very, very quickly. And that was only for me, who, number one, a supporter, a fan, but who has been very lucky and very privileged to not only have enjoyed nearly every second of his glorious sporting career, but have been honoured and privileged to have got to know Graham and indeed his wife Amanda over the years. So to say that, hearing the news that was broken that particular morning, to say that it sent me sideways would be like saying, you wouldn't eat ice cream in the winter. But, it's actually hard to sort of know what to say. The only thing I can tell you all, without revealing too much, or I wouldn't certainly want to upset Amanda or the family by saying too much. I am extremely grateful to her for keeping in contact with me in recent days, keeping me in the picture with how himself is getting on. I can tell you all that thankfully there are signs of progress. It's the game is not over vis-a-vis getting the result we want by a long shot yet, but the points are being chipped over. Please God, the goals will come. It's been an absolutely, and again I can stress and can't stress enough indeed, this is only from my own point of view as a fan and somebody that is honoured and privileged to be close to Graham and Amanda, and it's something I am extremely conscious of and grateful for, that I am in the position I'm in that regard. But it's been an awful harrowing few days, and while, as I said, the points are being chipped away, hopefully there's no hopefully, we have to believe the goal will come, and if the chance breaks, there's no better man on planet Earth to leave a full back looking extremely stupid and bury the ball. So please God, we every day will make things a little bit better, and eventually the result everybody would desire will eventually materialise. But please keep Graham, Amanda and their family in your thoughts and prayers. From a personal point of view, my only plausible way of even attempting to deal with the situation has been to try and stay busy. Now, thankfully, being the sports addict stroke journalist that I am, that hasn't been entirely difficult with the amount of sport that was on between Saturday and Sunday. And while I'm on Gaelic games, I might as well just have a quick scoot around. First of all, I think and hope there would be a general acceptance that so far the staging of the games has proven to be a success, and that the actual games themselves have been of surprising quality for the time of the year, and particularly when one looks at the Donegal-Tyrone game yesterday in absolutely horrendous conditions up in Ballybuffet. Immense credit is due to both teams for the quality of fare which they combined to produce. There must also be a special mention for Cavan goalkeeper Raymond Galligan for his active escapology on Saturday evening in Clonus. Now, how exactly Monaghan did win the game, I am sure they are still scratching their heads themselves, because I certainly am. My gut feeling would suggest that once the talented but temperamental Rory Beggan had kicked what appeared, well, it was an equaliser, but it appeared to be the shot which had brought about a bit of history, in that it looked like setting up the first penalty shootout in a GAA championship match. But I would imagine, and again this is only my own opinion, that the major problem there was that Monaghan themselves thought that was exactly the situation as well. But fair dues to Cavan, they walked the ball down the field and won themselves a free, and as good as Rory Beggin's equalising score undoubtedly was, what Cavan goalkeeper Raymond Galligan managed to execute in driving over the winner was arguably one of the greatest scores one is likely to see on a GA pitch for a long time now. To go back to the game in Ballybuffet yesterday, as I say, an absolutely cracking contest. Credit to both teams. One would probably, on the balance of probabilities, now have to consider Donegal to be favourite to take the Anglo-Celt Cup yet again. As I would have written in the piece, which I hope some of you seen either last night or this morning, the big thing that I would undoubtedly take out of the Donegal-Tyrone game was, how would you put it, reduction in the reliance of the home team yesterday on their talisman and the fulcrum of their team, Michael Murphy. Now, don't get me wrong, the Glanties man still had his stamp all over the game, and he still very much is the person who makes them tick, as they say, and literally everything they do goes through him in one way or another, whether it's him dropping back into his back line to augment their defence, or coming out around the middle of the field to claim kickouts, or indeed hovering in close to goal, which I would have absolutely no doubt is where he is of most benefit to them, especially with the new mark rule in play now. And there is my darling Susie gone in behind me to prepare this evening's supper if I ever get if I ever get this bit of recording done, but we will get there. Murphy, as I say, is still the conductor of the orchestra, very much from a Donegal point of view, and as I say, like, whether that be dropping back to augment his defence, or, as I was just saying there, to me he would be absolutely tailor-made for being deployed as a means of taking advantage of the mark rule in its current form, in its revised form, I suppose you could say, whereby it can be awarded in close to goal if one has forwards of the stature and know how, number one, to win their ball, and secondly, to take the score arising from the awarding of the mark should the opportunity present itself, as Meads Jordan Morris terrifically demonstrated last week against Monaghan in Clonus. But there's no doubt, since the new dictum was introduced in its current form, to my mind anyway, there has been no greater exponent of it than Murphy, and certainly parked on the edge of the square, he would give any fullback in the country their belly full of, as regards trying to keep tabs on him in a one-on-one scenario with the new version of the mark rule there to his benefit and that of his team. Now, the thing about it was that up until a year or two ago, Murphy's influence and importance to Donegal was such that they literally, over the course of any one game, could not afford to leave him inside for the duration of the whole game. Now, as intimated a moment or so ago, he does still wander out the field and could be liable to pick up ball anywhere around the pitch. But the thing about it is, very noticeably, there is not the same need almost for every single thing to go through the full forward. It reminds me of a time which unbelievably is nearly a quarter of a century ago now, when Trim played Navan O'Mahony's in a Meath Senior Football Championship final, and the great Darren Fay, God bless him, was literally trying to do absolutely everything for Trim. He was playing midfield, he was taking frees in the back line, he was taking frees in the forward line, he was trying to do place kicking, you name it, he was trying to do it. But the bottom line is, no one man can do 15 men's job on his own. So where Donegal, say in 2012, had the likes of Frank McLean, Carl Lacey, Neil Gallagher, Colin McFadden, and a very young Paddy McBrearty at that stage, augmenting what Murphy brought to the table. There was a period thereafter whereby he seemed to be, with the greatest respect to those around him, he seemed to be more or less carrying the ship on his own back. But certainly now, as I alluded to in yesterday's piece, he definitely seems to have more backup around the place now when one looks at the likes of Michael Langan and Jamie Brennan, and when you the like of Oisin Gallen and these lads coming in off the bench. And I think I'm right in saying Paddy McBrearty was an unused sub yesterday. So when you consider the strength and depth that Declan Bonner has at his disposal, it's very easy to see why, for me at least, they would not only be favourite to triumph in their own province, but they would also be on the short list of those who could and should go damn near at least trying to wrestle Sam Maguire out of the capital and bring him somewhere else for his Christmas holidays. Now, I know that is a lot very much easier said than done, but Donegal certainly merit inclusion in any such discussion. Now, as we know, for some reason best known to the GAA themselves, there is no backdoor in the football championship this year, even though there was one allowed in hurling, but why that was ever allowed to be, I don't know. It is probably the case of, as a dear departed friend of mine used to say, the crying child gets the bottle. Indeed, football in a lot of cases doesn't speak up for itself, maybe as much as the hurling fraternity do, and that is not a go at them, by the way. That is to their immense credit, and they should be commended for it, and indeed those in the football end of things should sit up and learn from and work with the hurling people rather than seeing it as a competition. But with the championship gone to a knockout format in football this year, there are two things come to mind. One, as I said, the Donegal definitely must enter the picture, and secondly, that this is 1 year that Mickey Hart and Tyrone, if they had the availability of a backdoor option, I would be fairly confident that they would have played themselves back into it, and possibly given themselves a fairly lengthy journey for the season, in just due to the fact that for large portions of that game yesterday, it looked like they were about to actually cause what would have been quite a surprise on the day, but just perhaps Donegal were that little bit more streetwise, having been on the road that little bit longer now. I know that may seem strange when Tyrone were only in the final 2 or 3 years ago, but there's certainly been an awful lot of change in Tyrone personnel since that. But I think while Tyrone were on top yesterday, we certainly got a glimpse of the Tyrone to come, if you want to call it that, embodied by Conor McKenna and Derek Hanovan and youngsters like that, and when one puts Colin McShane back into that forward line, one would have to concur with Colin O'Rourke's assessment during commentary that it has the potential, at the very least, to look one of the most potent forward lines in the country going forward. So in actual fact, I would have thought the decision to take Derek Hannivan off yesterday was both curious and counterproductive to a very large degree. Now, I know there were a debate sort of sprung from offsprung from another debate, I suppose you would say, on the Sunday game last night. I'm glad I didn't see the second part of it, because with the week we've had here, I've no doubt it would have made my blood boil even further. But to go to the main part of the debate, seemingly it centred around the position of Mickey Hart as Tyrone manager with regard to will he stay on, will he go, or whatever the case may be. Now, if I was in Mickey's shoes, I'd be holding tight and holding firm and standing firm and saying that he had no intention of going anywhere, because there's no doubt that the team he will be able to assemble, say potentially for next season, whenever that kicks off, put it like this, I wouldn't mind if Meath had the same pool of resources to work with then that will be available to the Red Hand County. So I think from a personal point of view, I would say Mickey will be in absolutely no rush to go anywhere, nor should he, I imagine, given all that he has given to the county. But more so than that, I think it would be foolhardy for the power brokers in Tyrone to even contemplate a change of manager, given how efficient they did look in yesterday's game, and given that the only thing that really knocked them about this year, well, there was two things. Number one, the altered format in the championship due to the unique set of circumstances the world is dealing with presently, but also due to the manner in which some of their top rated players were unavailable due to injury. But sure, we'll see what plays out in the weeks and months to come. But between the personal side of things and running through them couple of games, I think that is enough discussion on GAA for now. So we will move on and go to news of rugby next. And mention of rugby, of course, can only lead to discussion about one thing, namely Ireland's catastrophic capitulation last week against France in the last round of the Six Nations Championship in Paris. Now, last week, as in early in the week, before the game, I had actually written a piece commending Cian Healy for what would be, and indeed was, the occasion of his 100 international cap, in Paris last Saturday, and of course early on in the game it looked extremely like the fairy tale day the fairy tale scenario was going to have its day, in that on the occasion of the Clontarf man's 100 cap, he actually went over for Ireland's first try, and at that stage in the game looked as if it had set the outfit in green on the way to the victory they required in order to claim the Six Nations Championship once again. But unfortunately, as we now know, that was very much a case of a false dawn, in that the wheels very much fell off the wagon thereafter, and left Ireland in such a situation that they not only didn't get the win they needed to secure the championship, they were resoundingly beaten, is the only way you could describe it. Now, look, if you look at it from a point of view that when I was a young fella, he would say, well, about 20 years ago, the tide started to turn, in that it was around that time that Brian O'Driscoll scored a hat-trick of tries in Paris. But for years before that, there would be absolutely no mention or talk, or, to be brutally honest about it, it would have been considered that there was absolutely no possibility of beating the French anywhere, let alone in Paris. I mean, I think back, I suppose the first real stars of French rugby I can think of, you're talking about Serge Blanco and Philippe Sella and Philippe Saint-Andre and people like that. But the mere thought of Ireland beating them when I was a young fellow would have been considered absolute poppycock. So when one thinks that sort of from around the time Brian O'Driscoll did score that hat-trick of tries that Sunday at the start of the new century, it sort of was the kickstart of what would have to be classified as a golden era for Irish rugby, between what the three provinces achieved, what three of the provinces, should I say, achieved in the European Cup, which to many of us will always be called the Heineken Cup, and indeed the progress made by Connacht in winning the we call it the league, say, because I honestly can't remember whether it was the Pro 12 or Pro 14 the year Connacht won. Whatever it was, that victory at the time represented astounding progress for the men from the West, who not too long before that were facing the possibility of being disbanded as a team altogether. Now that would have been a completely asinine idea and a complete insult to the rugby people of Connacht. Look, there are times, if you want to switch codes for a moment, there are times when you see GAA teams going out and taking, say, a very heavy trouncing off, I don't know, your Dublins or your Kerrys or Limerick or Kilkenny and hurlings there, Tipperary or whoever it may be, and you're saying to yourself, Jesus, is there any real point in these guys trying to compete at at that particular level? Now, of course, the same could have been said about Connacht for a long time, but to the credit of everyone down there in the West, and this is only my own opinion now, but Eric Elwood in particular really picked the show up off the floor down there, I suppose would be how you describe it. And I mean, for them to win the like of the Pro 12, if it was that, which I think it was at that time, was an absolutely huge thing. And like, I mean, the boon that would have germinated for both Connacht Rugby itself and Irish Rugby could be of incalculable value, because like, kids are, whether for right or wrong reasons, and thankfully the you would hope the numbers going the wrong side of the tracks are not what they used to be in some cases, but the point is that kids are highly impressionable. Look, we all had heroes when we were younger. As I said earlier in the show, when I was younger, say, when Meath football was at its absolute peak, and by that I would always itemise that calculation between 1986 and 2001. Now, regular or long-term devotees to this space will of course know that Colin O'Rourke and Graham Geraghty will forever jointly hold the two top spots, simply as say, from the point of view of who was my hero of Sean Boylan's shall we say old team, and then the newer team that came after, your Lyons, McEntees, O'Rourke's, and won the 1996 All-Ireland, backbone by the likes of Mark O'Reilly, Darren Fay, Paddy Reynolds, Graham, Trevor Giles, etc., etc. Now, my point in bringing that up simply was that at the time Connacht Rugby won that Pro 14, your Johnny Muldoon's, Ulton Delan's, Jack Carty, all these fellas would have absolutely been heroes to the youngsters in Connacht and inspired them to take up the oval ball game, and in so doing keep the process of continuing to unearth and produce young emerging talent going forward in the right direction. Now, there's no doubt, like, when one considers how well, of course, Ulster really, I will hold my hand up and admit, as regards European Cup rugby at inverted commas club level, and I only put the inverted commas there because of the fact that obviously Ireland are represented by our 4 provincial teams in European competition. I will admit that the first time it came on my radar was when Ulster won it in 1999. Now, I have since learned from research various different things, and I just had a quick look tonight before I resumed recording, and when you think that Munster played their first game in the European Cup on a Wednesday afternoon, I think it was in Musgrave Park or Tom Clifford Park, the home of young Munster, with an attendance commensurate to one man and his dog. It gives you some indication of how much the popularity of an interest in rugby has spiraled in this country. But I think if Saturday's reversal and ultimate disappointment has against France has taught us anything, I think it is that there is certainly, to my mind, there was always going to be a period of transition after the last Rugby World Cup, but I do feel that it is something which is going to continue and may in fact become a little more stark as time goes on, but because while even this year now, with Andy Farrell having come in to replace Joe Smith and all the upheaval and change of routine that would entail, even though it shouldn't have really taken that much, because at the end of the day Farrell had been the New Zealanders assistant for the past while, but even allowing for all that, you would have hoped that even though many of the Irish stalwarts who are still there had accumulated a fair dose of mileage over the recent past due to them, I suppose what you could say, being victims of their own success in some ways, could be, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. I think I was saying that they could actually be victims of their own success in some ways, because between all the mileage they would have accumulated between playing with the provinces, playing with Ireland, and then there would have been quite a number of Irish players selected for British and Irish Lions duty and things like that. And eventually, in any sport, or indeed in any walk of life, an engine can only take so much before it either needs refueling or repair. But in the context of rugby, that needs to be multiplied about tenfold because of the physicality and intensity of the oval ball game and what it takes out of those partaking in it. Now, there's no doubt that the Irish team have unearthed some fine younger players in the recent and not so recent past. I mean, you think of the likes of James Ryan and Caelan Doris and Rossbourne at fly half. Rossbourne at fly half. Will Connors in the pack, and people like that. So I mean, there is definitely younger talent coming through, and that is probably and hopefully likely to remain being the case when one thinks of younger players like Hugh O'Sullivan at Leinster and the likes of Craig Casey and Ben Healy down in Munster. But my reason for the totality of that rather large preamble was that Saturday, unfortunately, when it did begin to unravel, what it did was it actually exposed something which I think had permeated certainly the national team, and in fact maybe some of the provincial teams as well, in that they are absolutely brilliant going forward and capable of running up major scores, but if you are struggling with, or at least even having a slightly faulty defensive setup and indeed defensive lines, as we know from anyone that has watched enough rugby or is anyway familiar with the game, will know that line speed and line breaks and the like are all crucial in that particular sport and discipline. And what you mean by line speed is that if one team is coming up the field attacking, just how fast the defending team gets themselves into their preferred shape and mobilises. So the fact that Ireland did sort of ship as big a score as they did against the French last Saturday night, for me at least, it was another exposure of a malaise that has been in the Irish defence for quite some time now, and until that is eradicated or at least treated, gut instinct would be to suggest that there could be dicey enough times ahead for Irish rugby until the like of that problem is rectified. But for now, all one can do is look forward to the start-up of the inverted commas club competitions for the provincial teams, and also this new international tournament, at least I think it's new anyway, which is coming up shortly as well. But just to round off on matters of the scrum and the like, until Ireland can solve or at least tighten up a bit the defensive laxities that have begun to creep in the last while, all the attacking flair in the world between Conor Murray, Johnny Sexton, Jacob Stockdale, Andrew Conway, all these boys, that will count for nothing unless they can stop shipping rather large scores at the other end of the field. So it'll be just very interesting to see what, if any, remedial action will be taken going forward. Speaking of going forward, and very, very sadly, one man who will not be going forward into another season in his profession next spring will be John Ox. Now, I know I did write a bit fairly extensively about John last week again at some point, but it was certainly poignantly sad yesterday, Monday, looking at the racing from the Curragh, knowing that John was sending out his last runners. Now, as I would hope long-term devotees of this here web space would know that there was an extremely long tail connection between John Ox, his family, and the parish of Boylan and Clonee, going back well over half a century, if not further. And so there was certainly a very personal and local twang to the emotions felt when John bowed out at the Curragh yesterday, Monday. It was noticeable that the last couple of horses that he did run either won or ran very well in defeat. Now, the thing about that was that, if some of them horses go somewhere and go to a different yard and train on, you would hope that they would be able to land a fairly big pot. Excuse me, folks. But you know, I think I said last week in the piece that I wrote, all that could be said as regards John Ox and retiring and that. You know, as I would have said extensively, there always was felt, and I hope always would be felt, a tremendous connection between John and Dunboyne, certainly from a Dunboyne point of view, and I do not mean this in a disparaging way towards anyone, but those of us whose roots will go back far enough would actually have personal connections with the story of the Ox family in and around the locality. For instance, I know in either 1946 or 47, my dad and his late brother Billy threw gravel out of the family sandpit, as it was then, to down to Wood Park Stud, where John Ox Senior was the stud manager at the time, and likewise to what will always be known locally as Cares of Cluny at Somerset. Somerset Stud, even though it is now owned, I believe, by connections of people with whom I would have a very close relationship, where John Ox Senior also worked. So that was our own personal little connection with the Ox family. And as I said, after See the Stars swept all before him in what I think was 2009, you know, when St. Peter's GA Club held the get together for John and his wife Katrina, you know, there was many people in attendance that night who would have had connections to the Ox family and the Power family, who would have been cousins of theirs, and you know, Eugene Power, who would have been John's first cousin, lived in Dunboyne, well, within Dunboyne Parish, still up until a couple of years ago. So it was great to have Eugene there that night as well. But you know, as I think it was Kevin O'Ryan and Fran Berry that were commenting on Racing TV one of the nights last week, I think it was, or it could have been the night John announced that he wasn't going to renew his license. The two lads, Kevin and Fran, were saying on the telly how unusual and downright strange it will be not to have an Ox in the training ranks going forward, because as far as I know, and I sit to be corrected on this, as far as I know, John and Katrina, I don't know if they have family, but from the way the lads were talking, it would appear that Currabeg, when John bowed out yesterday at the Curra, that the way the two lads were saying it on the telly, that would have sort of more or less given the impression that that was it as regards the Ox connection to the racing scene currently anyway. Now, having achieved what John Ox did achieve in the sport, and I am not even going to attempt to reel that off, because I wouldn't feel able or qualified for multiplicity of reasons, and the last thing I would want to do is start into some half-assed job and make a bags of it, but I don't know, now, being the type of man that John is, or certainly as he came across a couple of times, I had the pleasure and honour of meeting him. He wouldn't strike me as the type of man who would sit down and write a book or produce a book or that. In this case, this would be a situation where I would be earnestly hoping I'm wrong, because what a story he would have to tell. But certainly, if there are no addendums to the current situation, it was certainly the end of an era at the Curry yesterday, and what a story and what a legacy the Ox family leave behind them. And I honestly do hope that whether John does it himself or somebody else does it, I really do hope the story of the Ox family and their contribution to Irish life, not just Irish racing, is recorded by, as I say, either by John himself or with the help of somebody else, because it is too much of a treasure trove and too much of a source of pride for it to go unchronicled, As regards the racing story in Dunboyne, another little chapter could be put into it. In the last, I was going to say in the last week, in the last 24 hours, I suppose you could say, having seen Silver Class run another good race for the Mulvaney's Bar Syndicate in the Curra. Now, he, having won so well in Navan last week, I suppose to expect him to follow up again so quickly might have been a little bit akin to going to the well, perhaps once too often, but I've absolutely no doubt that Tony Martin will come up with a plan to get a couple more good days out of both himself and Drakensberg. Let it be over Jumpster on the flat, and I know myself from just skirting around racehorse, I can't say ownership in my own case, but shall we say, management, you know, the costs that are involved in keeping something like that afloat, it gets to a point where at the end of the day it really can't be regarded as a hobby when you're doing the thing of having horses in training due to the I don't think astronomical is too strong a word to deploy here when talking in terms of expenses accrued, in terms of what it takes to keep a racehorse in training. So from the point of view of the lads in the Mulvaney's Bar Syndicate, Silver Class would have picked up a nice few bob again yesterday, which will keep the kitty ticking over and you know, keep them in a good position going forward. They still have two very useful horses there by way of Silver Class and Drakensberg. They're only rising 7 at the turn of the year, so they should, with any luck, still have plenty of fun days with the both of them, and look forward to having plenty more to write in that regard. Just to wrap up for this week, folks, and I've absolutely no doubt that you will notice again that it has taken me 2 or 3 or more days to put this week's show together. I am not doing that, pointing that out, looking for sympathy or anything of the sort. In actual fact, I would be quite disgusted with myself that it has taken so long to get it all worked out, but I think and hope many of you would understand how circumstances can take over the smooth running of such operations from time to time, and that is at the best of times, even without mentioning you know, what we were discussing at the start of this evening's show or this week's show. But just to wrap up, I just say a few words about soccer, and yet again I find myself coming back to the running disaster that is Manchester United, but I suppose the difference in one's line of thought as regards Manchester United now compared to perhaps previously was that up until this point I would have found myself justifiably, I think, sticking very much up for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and the position he and by extension the club found themselves in. But you know, I think as much, and I absolutely love the man as a player, and would have been very, very impressed with the job he has done or had done when he took over first and went what I think was 11 or 12 games unbeaten, but there comes a time, I suppose, when the man in the dugout essentially has to carry the can for the leaky bucket, in that there's only, we know ordinary spectators and supporters of the club, and indeed observers of football, no matter what club they support, won't need telling that for far too long now Manchester United as a club have been in utter chaos. Now, the die-hard fan in me would be inclined to say that such has been the case since Alex Ferguson left as manager, although in fairness it has to be said that they did win an FA Cup under Louis van Gaal, who was, of course, as we now know, sacked the day after it, which, the more one looks back at it, the more ridiculous that looks in particular. But they did win 2 trophies under Jose Mourinho when he was there, and again they decided to defenestrate with the services of the Portuguese, who, much to my surprise, I must admit, has turned Spurs around to some degree at least. Now, I don't believe they are or will ever be as good as they were under Maurizio Pochettino, but that's neither here nor there. My point is that whether it's the Glazer family themselves or that incompetent idiot Ed Woodward that's making the decisions in United, there's no doubt that not only is the club a pale shadow of what it was, it has now taken on the look of a bloody laughingstock. I think it was on a Sky Sports advert during the week. One of the clips is in it is Gary Neville saying during commentary on a particular match that it's a shambles. United can't sign the players that they need, or something to that effect. And now, while one could very easily poke a dig at Gary giving out about different team managements and that, given his apocalyptic efforts with the team in Spain, Valencia, my apologies. One could very easily say, well, Gary is not in a great position to talk, except in this case I would be of the opinion that he is, for the simple reason that the man is Manchester United to the backbone, or maybe a better way to even put it, Manchester itself to the backbone. Something that I think is bookmarked by the fact that himself and some of the other lads from the class of 92, Dave Beckham, Paul Scholes, Nicky Butt, his brother Phil, of course, the day off Salford City, and they have appeared to make great progress with that club as regards elevating their status within the game. Now, as I say, after Gary's attempt at management with Valencia, shall we say, there's part of you inclined not to pay too much heed to what he said, but there's no doubt if you actually step back and analyse it, that now United being linked with top players is nothing new. In actual fact, if that wasn't the case, I would be really starting to get worried. But where the malaise starts to set in, and where an observer can really see the thing starting to fall apart a bit, as it were, was the amount of top players they've been linked with that they haven't been able to sign. Even off the top of my head, I'm thinking Matthias de Ligt, the Ajax defender, who I believe ended up going to Juventus. Jadon Sancho, they were linked with all summer, but never got near, I would say. There was even talk of one stage of Ronaldo coming back, or even Gareth Bale going to United, none of which materialised, which I think is a sad but realistic indication of where the club stand in terms of status at the moment. I think certainly Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, possibly even Arsenal and Spurs are a more attractive proposition for players looking to get into the Premiership at the moment than United are. That shouldn't be the case, but it is the case. I know, just as I recorded this morning, or lunchtime I suppose you would say, I did watch them defeating Everton 3-1. Now, under normal circumstances, beating Everton 3-1, well, certainly in Fergie's time, beating Everton 3-1 would be akin to collecting a pint of milk from the door, for those of you that would be old enough to remember such a concept. Now, I do realise, and I'll never forget, 1995, obviously, when the day after my sister's wedding, while we were all in the Mill House in Clonee, which unfortunately is no longer with us, watching the FA Cup final between United and Everton that day. Of course, the Paul Rideout header did in fact win the game for Everton, but by and large, defeating Everton or anyone like them should be considered routine enough for the like United. So, while it was better than the abysmal performance they put in against some unknown Turkish team in the Champions League in midweek, it's still not where a club of United status, or at least their former status, should be aiming for. I mean, after what, 7 games of the league to be sitting 13th. I mean, that is a scandal. Especially when one thinks, and this is the nub of the issue, which brings us back to the Glazers and Ed Woodward, etc., etc. When it's considered the amount of money that has been pumped into that squad from the time Ferguson left, and rather than improving things, if you were to study it, I'd say the stats and patterns would show a trend of regression rather than progress. Now, I don't know if they were going to remove Solskjaer. I'm imagining between the few weeks between the end of last season and the start of this one surely would have been a better proposition than leaving it go too long into the season, because I think the further you let something like that go into the season, there's 2 things to it. One, will you say to yourself, wherever they might be at a given time, well, you'd say to yourself, he's after unless they were apocalyptically bad in the table. And believe you me, I'm sure anyone with even the faintest interest in United would admit that 13th is not good. But unless it was to get even apocalyptically worse than that, I would have thought that the longer you leave Solskjaer there, the harder it will be to dislodge him then. The longer the season goes on. But the other side of it is, and I think this has become a very prevalent and relevant topic in the last couple of days, I would have thought that when Jose Mourinho did get the door, coming up on 2 years ago now, it must be, because Ole took charge of his 100th game last week, so it must be around 2 years ago. But I would have thought when Mourinho got the door that time, that they should have just moved heaven and earth to get hold of Maurizio Pochettino at that time. Now look, of course the romantic in a man would have loved to see it work out for Solskjaer, and indeed, as I said a while ago, when for the first 12 games he was there, they went unbeaten, you're saying to yourself, Jesus, this could end up being the long-term solution. But whether it's down to him or the players, or what I think myself is an absolute shambles off the field in the boardroom, it just hasn't delivered the results for United to put them in such a position that a club of their status should be in. And I think, how long is a piece of string from the point of view of how much more time do they give Solskjaer to see can he turn it around, and perhaps, as looks increasingly likely now with every day that passes, possibly miss out on getting hold of Pochettino while he's still in the market, and then leaving yourself in an even bigger muddle going forward. But look, I suppose as regards shifting Solskjaer, today probably won't have advanced that cause any further, because they did. Now bear in mind, as I say, normally defeating Everton would have been one of those results was nearly chalked off the calendar before the match started. But to be fair to the Toffees, under Carlo Ancelotti, they had made great progress, and indeed made a terrific start to the season, which saw them on top of the table for a period. But there's no doubt from a United perspective, and again it was proved again today that Bruno Fernandes definitely does make a huge difference to that team, but it still, to my mind, it doesn't eradicate the issues which are continually coming up, and which I don't mind saying are still at centre half and have been there since Rio Ferdinand retired. Now, I was talking to a friend of mine who is a Man United fan and an all-round sports fan like myself, with a particular fondness for GA and horse racing, so we'd be on the same page on a lot of topics, and I found myself having to agree with him again that, having seen United's result against that Turkish outfit in midweek, that Leicester City must be indeed laughing all the way to the bank when you consider what sort of money United ended up giving them for Harry Maguire and for the centre half to turn out basically the equivalent to putting a bush in a gap that a beast to be nearly able to jump over. But his his inadequacy is exposing the glaring problems in United, which their fairly decent attacking platform some of the time manages to paper over the cracks with, but it's really, really hard to know what the solution to the problem is, or for that matter, where said solution will materialise from. But 13th in the table, they should not be, and surely you would imagine that if it was in any other of the clubs that there is no way that there would be so much inaction at director and board level while the rest of the field pulls away from them. So we await future developments with interest, but hardly with bated breath. Finally, while I'm on soccer, I just must give a quick mention to Dundalk, who I can't remember whether I mentioned them last week or not, but they put up a very spirited display against Arsenal last week at the Emirates. you know, they could have very easily lost by more than the 3-0 they did go down by, but at the same time, you know, 3-0 was in some ways harsh on them. But what I could not understand, and I think was downright wrong, was to discover on Thursday night that Meath's very own Gary Rogers had been dropped for their game against Rapid Vienna, I think it was, and I know whoever it was that they put in goal instead of the Bohemian man ended up letting in two very soft goals. But I just thought, well, first of all, I must acknowledge that yes, it was an error from Gary that was in the build-up to the second Arsenal goal last week. But I think to drop the man after all he's done for that club and throughout his League of Ireland career indeed, and bearing in mind that of course he was included in an Ireland squad and on a few different occasions, even though he didn't in fact get a cap, because as we know, Dunboyne's Darragh Lenihan did become the first Meath man to attain an international cap against the United States. What must be a couple of years ago now at this stage, but you know, I just thought for Gary to be dropped in the way he was, I thought was poor form and unnecessary. But I've no doubt, even though Gary is around the same age as myself, or possibly the exact same age, I would have no doubt that, please God, if he does play on for another year, season, that he will bounce back. In the meantime, I will have absolutely no doubt he will bounce back in another sense, in that he will have the two Meath goalkeepers on top form for tomorrow's, or it could be today, Sunday, by the time you're seeing this, for the first round, the championship against Wicklow and Ockram. I do know Gary has done great work with Mark Brennan and Andy Colgan and the other keepers Andy has tried in recent times, and please God, they'll all get the result they want in Ockram tomorrow, and the weird winter football will continue for another while and shorten the old winter itself. I think we must be nearly heading for 3 hours all told at this stage. I do humbly apologise for that, folks, but I hope you've gained some entertainment or information out of my incessant warbling, and please God, we will be leading off our next edition with better news about Graham Geraghty and reflecting on a good Meath performance in Ockram against Wicklow. All the best.